All right, welcome everyone. It's 5:30 and we'll start the Planning Commission hearing for July 26th. On the agenda tonight, we have 3 items. All 3 items carry an asterisk, which means that we will be recommending approval or denial to the municipal council, and the municipal council will then hear the case in their next session. Before we start, I'll ask Ms. Wyndham to say our prayer tonight, and Mr. Jones, Pledge of Allegiance.
Our Father in heaven, we are so very grateful to Thee to be able to be here tonight. We're thankful for this government that we have that allows us to speak our minds and be heard. We are very thankful for this process and pray that we'll be able to hear the items on the agenda tonight and all be able to express themselves in a simple, forthright manner. We ask Thee to please bless our first responders, those that protect our city 24 hours a day. We ask Thee to also bless our troops that are fighting throughout the world. We love Thee and we ask Thee to watch over us, and we say this in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Please arise and repeat after me the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, and to finish up our housekeeping, we'll just take roll of the commissioners this evening, starting on the left. Just please state your name and whether you have any conflicts of interest this evening.
Shannon Ellsworth, no conflicts.
Edward Jones, no conflicts.
Deborah Jensen, no conflicts.
Maria Winden, no conflict.
Dave Anderson, no conflicts.
Thank you. All right, our first item for this evening, item 1, Scott Bowles requests an ordinance amendment to section 14.20.160 to increase the size of signs permitted in the Regional Shopping Center, SC3 zone. This has citywide impact and will be presented by Aaron Ardmore.
Yeah, thank you. So you may recall about a month ago or so, we had a similar amendment for a sign at the mall. This time it's for different signs, the ones out on University Avenue. So there's one here and one here. They're actually existing in the right-of-way between the traffic lanes. You could see them, maybe. Do you mind? Oh, there we go. So that's what's there on both of those sites. Here's what's proposed for those sites. It's similar design and look as the large pole sign that was proposed over by the freeway. So in order to accomplish this, the applicant has proposed this amendment to the SC3 zone code. So adding to A, to add the word advertising, so they are able to advertise what's going on at the mall, what stores they want to advertise, and so forth. And then in D and E, adjusting the size allowances for the new signs. If you look here, they're pretty minimal, especially if you look what's around. Look at the Maverick sign on this one, and the Phillips signs, Chevron sign here. They're just outdated and too small for anybody to really notice as they're driving down University Avenue. So the proposal increases that to 500 square feet and to 45 feet in height to accomplish their sign proposal. Staff has reviewed this. Same reasons as the previous one. You know, this is going to help economically the mall, which helps the city. We are recommending approval on this item, and I'll take any questions if you have them.
Thank you. Any questions from the commissioners? Ms. Wyndham? Mr. Jones?
I'd recommend you correct the spelling on 40.
That's a good recommendation.
The printed copy here is correct.
Yeah, it is. All right, thank you.
I just have a question concerning the brightness of the signs. In the evening hours, will it be able to be toned down so that drivers won't be blinded by bright white?
Right, so existing in the code are brightness requirements, and that's in Title 1430.025. So that regulates the sign copy, how long it has to be static, how bright it can be, and so forth. So that should take care of any of those issues.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I'd like to ask the applicant, Mr. Bowles, to step forward and present his case.
Good evening, Commissioners. I really don't have much to add for what Mr. Ardmore has stated. This is simply another phase of our ongoing redevelopment. Signage is a major portion of our phase one of the redevelopment of the Provo Town Center. Well, we brought forth the pylon first because that's the most important sign. Obviously has the most visibility and traffic counts in front. I would say that this signage we're looking more towards starting next year in 2018, whereas pylon signage, since we received council approval during their last meeting, we're hoping to submit building permits soon as we have final designs that we can submit to community development. But if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them because Mr. Ardmore covered all the points very thoroughly.
Mr. Jones?
Do you plan to change the design of the logo of the mall, or will it be that same?
So we have done a rebrand of the mall. We are not changing the name because you'd be surprised to know that Provo Town Center is, I think they sat on over 10,000 unique items, and so we don't really want to change over 10,000 unique items. So we are dropping the kind of weird Star Trek looking weirdness, and Brixton Capital ownership says we don't know if it was Star Wars, Star Trek, casino. We don't know what they were going for. That is going away. Hopefully in the next few weeks we'll be able to reveal what the new brand is. It's mostly going to be text, not some picture logo as well, keeping it pretty simple.
Can we vote on that?
Can we vote on that? We hope you will be happy. We got a pretty good group called the Dealey Group that specializes in retail marketing.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Any other questions? Mr. Anderson?
No questions here, actually.
Okay, if no further questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll turn it back over to the commission for discussion and a motion.
If there's no discussion, I move that we recommend approval of the proposed amendments to increase sign allowances in the SC3 zone as are described in the July 26 staff report.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. All those in favor of approval?
Aye.
Positive recommendation?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, then we will put forward a positive recommendation to the municipal council, and that was a unanimous vote. Okay, our second item, item number 2, McKay Christensen requests an amendment to section 14.21A.110 to eliminate the facade setback for buildings in the general downtown DT1 zone. This has applicability to the downtown neighborhood. And Mr. Wright will present this.
Thank you. So the applicant is requesting an amendment, an ordinance amendment to section 1421A.110, which deals with facade stepbacks. And basically a facade stepback is not to be confused with a setback, which is a building to be set back a certain distance, but the stepback is at a certain level in the building. Currently in our code, it's above the third story, has to be stepped back from where the front facade is. And so this request would be applicable for the block between 100 East and 200 East, where he has a proposed project, commercial, mixed-use, residential development in with the city right now. And so staff reviewed that request and feels that the downtown zone currently has that requirement just along Center Street, and staff feels that the requirement, as opposed to just being eliminated for that 100 East, 200 East block, also be taken away for the whole zone, so that the step back requirement's no longer applicable in the DT1 zone. And so some of the reasonings behind that would be to help development be able to utilize the space along Center Street to the most potential, increasing the amount of floor area that could be in a new development, and not have to have that area that's stepped back and just void space along Center Street. It would also help with anchoring the corners with buildings that have more of a substantial presence as people come into the downtown and are able to feel the a sense of arrival to our downtown by anchoring those corners. Some other concerns might be protecting the historic district, which we want to make sure we're doing in our historic downtown. And so that will be done essentially through existing design standards in our code. They'll help protect the character that's there now and what we want to see there. And then Title 16, our landmarks preservation title in our code, also will govern how those historic buildings are treated and protected from development that wouldn't be desired there. So also another thing would be able to establish some variety in building height along Center Street, so that we just don't have a continuous 3-story level, but that there's some fluctuation there and bring some variety and character, which currently is there, but we want to make sure we're able to promote that as well. So those are some of the reasons why staff would recommend the approval, but that it apply for the whole DT1 zone. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Wright?
Go ahead.
Does anybody have any insight on how that requirement came to be in the first place, or why it was put into the code?
So I don't know necessarily the reason why it was put in there, but in 2012, when the DT1 zone, that requirement was, at that time it was 60 feet, and so that was reviewed and brought down to 25 feet, and then later on it was reviewed and brought down to 20. So it's kind of been one of those things where we've been seeing projects as they come in and saying, okay, these projects will work in our downtown. If we can get that reduction changed, they'll still be able to fit. I think the original concern was to kind of help protect the historic character of our downtown and how building heights could possibly have affected that. But as we've seen some projects come along, we've realized that that's something that could change, and we can see some variety in our downtown as well, while still protecting that historic character.
Were there any projects that were built that you're aware of with the 60-foot? Yeah.
You just lose so much value in a building with a 60-foot
Yeah.
step back like that it was never even attempted by a developer.
I wonder, light and air, is that part of the philosophy on not having a corridor like Center Street framed with a big tall building? I mean, that's kind of what I wonder about losing with having some facade step back at some point, if you're getting, I don't know what, 5, 6 stories tall, and having that kind of expanse.
Yeah, I think in some cities where they have smaller or narrower roads, and then much taller buildings, that really becomes an issue with sunlight being able to get to the urban canopy, as it's called. But with our 135-foot wide Center Street, which is quite a bit wider than a lot of those downtown areas where that concern is a bigger deal, I think where we're at, I don't think we'll see much of an issue there. And yeah, there is still height limits that are applied in the DT1 zone. So I think around 6 stories is where we're going to see the tallest buildings in that DT1.
Last question for me, I think, is just what is the setback in this zone? If we were talking about, for example, a 6-story building, how far would that have to be set back from the
Setback or step back?
setback?
So the setback is 0 to 10 feet, so it's a maximum 10 feet that it can be set back currently, so it'd have to be 10 feet or closer.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have a
Yeah, what was the impetus for this code change?
So the applicant has a project in with the city, and to be able to accommodate what he's looking to do there, he's requesting this removal of that step back requirement to accommodate that development.
Any other questions?
So is 6 stories the maximum somebody can build on Center Street, or is that just what you foresee?
So the current height is 100 feet, which is around 6 stories, depending on how big the main floor is with commercial. So it could be 6 to 7 stories potentially. But 100 feet is the number there.
Okay, and then one other question. What are the existing design standards that are already in place that it says here are sufficient to regulate the design of new development in such a way as to ensure the compatibility, suitability, and quality of development if the step back were to not be there anymore?
Yeah, so in 1434-295, that's the downtown design standards, I guess, and there's things in there that will help get the type of design that's pedestrian oriented and would help create a walkable downtown. Things like doors every 50 feet and windows and architectural materials that are used and things like that, that the pedestrian that's walking down the street is going to be able to interact the most with. With the step back, a lot of times you'll hear about a sense of enclosure, something that in design along these types of corridors is something that as you're walking down the street, if you feel like you're in a space that has enough enclosure to kind of make you feel comfortable there, and that's one of the reasons why there's that setback of 0 to 10 feet to kind of bring those buildings closer so you have shops and things like that as you're walking down the street. So all those types of elements are in the design standards, whereas the step back is kind of above the pedestrian realm, I guess. It's 3 stories up. They're not looking up there above the tree canopy and things like that as well. So with the design standards that we have in place and with the protections in the landmarks preservation title of our code, we feel like that there's enough there to be able to make sure that we're maintaining the compatibility of our existing historic district, and that new development has the quality of the architectural materials, the things that people are going to be interacting with as they experience the downtown. And so I guess, does that help answer your question as far as?
Yeah.
So we have those type of design standards in the downtown zones, and we also have similar residential design standards for the campus high density zones. The staff would love to go through those with the Planning Commission line by line in our study sessions to see if you think they're adequate or whether or not they should be bolstered in any way. I don't think this project should be held up for that type of review, but we would love to have the Planning Commission involved in a discussion like that if that's appealing to the Planning Commission.
And I just have one question. Does the articulation that's required of the third floor, what would be the roof if it were only 3-floor building, but the third floor, is that required throughout the downtown 1 district? In other words, when you reach the top of that third level, are you required to have a cornice band or some sort of architectural expression? As sort of a unifying design element?
Yeah, so if you read here on the text in front of you, it talks about an architectural expression line, such as a cornice or similar feature that will be at the 3rd story roof line. And I believe in the design standards, there's mention of those items as well. So if this were taken away, that we could also make sure those elements and things are still preserved as well. On another note as well, so that what's in front of you right now is the applicant's proposed amendment, which you can see is changing it to 100 East instead of 200 East, and then adding that the step back requirement for the building facade elevation is just for, would not be required between 100 East and 200 East. And then if you look at number 2 that's in the current code, it talks about this same area. It's the same area. It's 100 East and University Avenue, and so it's just redundant of the first section. And so staff's recommendation would just be to clean that up in this process as well, remove the redundant section of, or part of number 2 there.
Mr. Anderson?
So staff is proposing to leave the step back requirement between 500 West and 100 East.
So, yeah, so staff's recommendation would be to just take out 1421A 110 completely. If that's not where the Planning Commission wants to go, and they would want to do what the applicant is requesting, and just remove it for that block of 100 East to 200 East, that while doing that, we just clean up the code and take off section 2 there. So the recommendation is to just take it out, and the alternative recommendation would be to do it this way.
Mr. Jones? Mr. Jones?
Am I missing something? Is there a reason? Is there any justification to leave this setback in on the rest of Center Street? Or it seems to me like it would be cleaner just to remove the whole thing.
Yeah, correct. So that's our recommendation as staff, is to just remove the whole thing.
What is the argument again? What is the argument for leaving it in for the rest of the street or the rest of the downtown?
It would just be if you didn't feel comfortable removing it for the whole DT1 zone, and that you just wanted to do it for the block that the applicant's requesting. That would be the change there, would just be if you're wanting to do it for the whole DT1 zone or just this one block.
Thank you.
So just as a point of clarification, so we're clear, you are essentially recommending that we eliminate the facade step back requirement throughout DT1.
Correct.
And this was an alternative language that was proposed if we just wanted to impact that one block.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, what do you think the implications to the historic character of that neighborhood would be if in 20 years from now, all those buildings are 6 stories tall, even west of this proposed site.
So this facade step back, it's in the DT1 zone, but it's, as you can read, it's currently for property that's adjacent to Center Street. So if you look at just on Center Street, the historic district goes from 300 west to 100 east. And so all the properties within that area are already protected in our landmarks preservation title. So any proposals to build a 6-story building on one of those parcels would have to get approval from our Landmarks Commission. So the remaining blocks, which are closer to 500 west, there's nothing in those areas, well, maybe not nothing, but there's less in those areas that we would see as a negative impact to see a 6-story building in those areas.
Any other questions?
Do we have any, I mean, the applicant is here. Do we have any kind of visual depiction of what they're proposing and what this would look like without the step back? That, I mean, for me, that would kind of help to.
Yeah, I believe the applicant brought some stuff as well that we can, he can show those.
Okay. All right.
Here's a rendering of the proposed building on that block that the applicant's requesting.
Can you identify where this is?
So this is on the street right here is 100 East, and the street here is Center Street.
The old historic library, Carnegie Library, is right across the street to the west, and La Dolce Vita, the Italian restaurant, is right across the street also.
So this is where the gas station used to be.
Yes, sir.
That's an improvement.
And so the step back requirement currently would be applied here at the 3rd story and take out this area up here.
Are there any other questions for planning? Okay, if not, I'd like to invite the applicant, Mr. Christensen, to come forward and present his case.
You got that file, Dustin? And do you have the video by any chance? I sent you an email and it has a link. Oh, you're not able to play it up here? Okay. No, it's okay. And I don't know if you have a clicker to run through the slides. Something like that. Oh, perfect. Oh, great. Okay. So that's the image there. And maybe what I'll do is I'll first give you a brief description of the project. So what we have is everything along Center Street and along First East is commercial space. And then on the hard corner there where it says bistro, that's actually 2-story commercial space. And so the idea is that, we'd love to get a restaurant or something like that where we've got 2-story, you can get up there on the balcony and get 2-story views of the temple across the street. It's just kitty corner to us. That's the rooftop. We're proposing a rooftop balcony with fire pits and jacuzzis. You can go to the next one, and barbecue spaces and things like that. That's the table of contents. We can just go through the next one. So that should give you an idea of where the site is. So it's just basically 1 block east of University Avenue. And I happen to agree with what the staff is proposing from a developer standpoint. Just focusing on our site, we propose that the text amendment be made to just First East and Second East. And part of our rationale was, I think the original intent of that code was to preserve the historic height of Center Street. And, a lot of those buildings, whether it's the Knight Building or others, they go up 3 stories. And so I think the idea was they were going to preserve that history, and then if anything was added to the top of it, it would be stepped back and then go up. And so as we looked at that, we said, well, our site is much different than the rest of Center Street. If you continue to click through, the scale of the buildings on First East is different than the rest of Center Street because the county offices are set back, like I want to say maybe 150 feet or something off that corner or off the street. And therefore, there isn't really a historic scale there like the rest of Center Street. And you can connect to the next one. So if you look there, like the New Skin building and everything else along that street, like Dustin says, it's about 30, and I used Google and just measured it. You can see ground length is 30.51 feet. I obviously measured it off by about 5 feet because I think it's about 35 feet. But if you look here, we're at about 150 feet back off that building that's across the street from us. If you go to the next one, if you look at the width of all of the buildings along Center Street, it's about 130 feet, whereas our block, we're closer to 245 feet. So you don't have that historic scale, is what we were talking about. Then the architecture, they're also, you get east of Center Street and even east of 100 East, there is no historic architecture to maintain. As you mentioned, we've got a garage, and then you have the county offices, which are sort of mid-century modern or something like that. And if you scroll down, you can see the architecture obviously is not historic. So there's not anything to maintain there. And then just focusing on our site, we don't have any history to maintain. I thought Dustin brought up a great point that as you go along Center Street, the Historic Preservation Committee we've been through that process before, and they will require that you maintain the historicity, if that's a word, of the buildings that are on Center Street. And so I think that those facades along Center Street, if you were to expand this to all of Center Street, which again I think is a good idea, there's a way of maintaining that historical facade while also eliminating the setback. But of course, this is what our project looks like right now, and I think that anything would be an upgrade to what this site is right now. So, and then the last thing, just from an economic and a functional standpoint, and this is primarily why I think that it should be expanded to all of Center Street. When you're dealing with, if you go up and down Center Street, they're just bite-sized little pieces of property, right? Some of them are 25 feet wide. Ours happens to be close to 130 feet wide at the front, so we have a little bit more latitude. But if you're encouraging the redevelopment of downtown Center Street, which I think we are, you are, which I think, how do you accomplish keeping it feeling like it's 100 years old without actually feeling like it's 100 years old, if that makes sense? And the way to do that is to encourage redevelopment while also maintaining the history. And if you're going to do that, when you're dealing with these just bite-sized little pieces of property, you have to make them work as best as you possibly can. And if you were to look at our project, which is larger than probably some would be, but still very, very tight in this urban infill location, if we were to, those units on the front of our building, which is on the far right, they're about 42 feet long. And so if we were to take 20 feet off of that, you'd basically be looking at a 20-foot deep unit, so which we can't get. It just doesn't really make sense. We'd end up losing, in fact, our old schemes, when we did have a setback, we lost 21, basically it counted to about 21 units, all of those units from floors. So I got 7 units on the front there. We would lose 7 on floors 4, 5, and 6. So it's about 21 units, and we lost them actually on the backside, and we shifted everything forward. But so again, I think if you're going to encourage the redevelopment of Center Street, and you're looking to help developers make it work economically, I think it's best to do what you can to preserve the history of the buildings, but work with them on that setback. I don't think that. I just don't think it's developer friendly. I think it's very hard to make a project pencil like that. And that's about it. That's about all I have on them as far as a step back goes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do any commissioners have any questions for Mr. Christensen?
Oh, I will add one thing. We're trying to, I won't go back to the rendering, but if you look at our rendering, we go up with brick about 3 levels, and we're trying to articulate that, the history of downtown Center Street. And there are things that we can do, for example, that we're still going through the process of refining this, but at the 3rd level, do we add a cornice? We've got a cap, but do we add a cornice that actually flutes out and things like that? There are things that we can do to make the building look more historic. So,
thank you. Okay, if there are no questions, I'll turn it back over to the commissioners for discussion and a motion. Mr. Jones?
It seemed to me, it would appear to me that there are 3 questions. Do we deny this? Or do we make this apply just to that one block? Or do we make it apply to all of Center Street? So perhaps it would be wise to have a motion and then have an amendment and vote on the amendment. Does that make sense? Or does anyone else see the same question?
Well, I have a comment.
Ms. Wyndon?
I really like if we can put the picture of the proposed development back up. I like the design of this because it appears as if there is a step back. The break between the brick and, is that stucco? Gives that break and makes it appear visually as if there could be a step back there. My fear, if we made it all along Center Street, is that somebody could come along and I don't know what the design standards are, but could just make a solid wall, which would be, in my opinion, extremely unattractive. So that's a concern that I have. And I do very much realize that we need more housing here in Provo, and that there is very limited space to create that housing. But I think that that shouldn't always be the deciding factor when we're making our decisions. This is a very attractive design in my eyes, but I'm concerned about other designs that may come along if we make this carte blanche that may not have the same appeal. Those are my comments.
Madam Chair, can I borrow your pointer? Just to try to describe a couple of thoughts that I have. I'm a little bit embarrassed that, having read this before I came, I didn't have some of the thoughts that I have now that might be concerns with the proposal. As was mentioned by my colleague, great building. It'd be wonderful to see something else done with that site, certainly. I guess I have some thoughts. Just talked a lot about the historic character and some different things like that. For example, the building that's here, it's about that large, I would say, in terms of just bulk and mass. But in reality, it's set back, I would guess, 20 feet or so from the right-of-way, as is the building next to that on that block. And I guess we're probably worried less about what goes to the east then. Between that and I'm just thinking about the buildings that have been around in the area for a while in terms of what maybe, if we want to talk historic scale, that might be. Of course, just nothing on the order of that kind of bulk and mass. And I think in part the idea of that facade step back is to lessen at least the perceived bulk and mass of something, for somebody at street level. And frankly, it's not often that I have mixed feelings, but on this I think I do, just relative to, what the value might be of that, versus maybe making more efficient use of some potential building space. There's certainly a lot going on in the Center Street right-of-way, and I think that's partly, at least by design and intent, and that's great to have vibrant space and that sort of a thing. But this certainly would be a very different and distinct introduction to that part of the community in terms of its street presence and presence on the corner and different things like that. And I appreciate one of you that brought up the idea of, what would it be if that was the corridor versus maybe something that was a little bit different. And for me, I wonder if there's maybe some value of talking about exchanging a little bit in terms of maybe just a little bit more setback to allow for more of that plane being right on the right-of-way, just something to soften up that. And for me, it's more than a feeling as well. I mean, literally the light and air and having things grow at street level and that sort of thing. I think it makes a difference and certainly impacts just how things work at the street level. So
Mr. Jones?
I would suggest that we should consider this in the context of what's across the street as well as what's adjacent to it. Across the street, you have the historical courthouse, which is, 100 years old, whatever. And then beyond that, you have a very modern set of buildings in the state offices, county offices, and so forth. So I think this should be viewed in that context as well as what's on the same side of the street as that it is on.
I'll just add that the height doesn't concern me. The articulation of the facade is where you get into the weeds of how it fits into a historic downtown environment like this. I think from what I'm hearing from my fellow commissioners, we're not quite ready to agree that this would be the way to go to eliminate the step back for the entire DT1 zone. I think that's what I'm hearing. I think for tonight, we need to just consider this block and whether we would be comfortable with this block from 100 to 200 East. So we can at least keep the discussion moving forward without jumping into the bigger picture.
If that's how everybody feels, then I'd probably be in favor of continuing this. From my perspective, if we were to eliminate the step back, we'd start from more of the sort of urban core, where this is the last block. If any place, this is where the step back should be, in my opinion, not where it shouldn't be. If that makes sense, having the buildings
That's sort
on
of
the
a
property
gateway.
line. Maybe, yeah. I mean, well, or part of kind of the transition from an area where you'd have things on this scale versus something, and I'll admit, I don't know exactly what would be permitted going further east in one direction or further west, but I assume it'd be something of just lesser size in general.
To the east?
To the east, or for that matter, west of Fifth West as well. I assume that this is the kind of the most intense area from a land use perspective that the city has.
Yeah, if you go farther east, you get out of the downtown zone within like a block or so of the applicant's property there. And then same thing on west of 500 West, you start getting into the West Gateway zone, so a different zone. So the applicability is really between 500 West and 200 East. The historic district is actually between 300 West and 100 East. So the street right before this project starts is where the actual historic district is.
Okay.
Ms. Wyndon?
There virtually is no transition between this building and then the rest of the block flowing into the rest of the neighborhood. You have the Harmon House, which I don't know if that's directly
I think that's adjacent to.
next to this property, but then on the corner of Center and 200 East is the funeral home, which it actually is a home that they converted. And then going further east, you start having residences or homes that have been converted into businesses, but they are homes. And so I don't know, going along with what Mr. Anderson was saying, if this is such a huge, I like the project, but it is a big project in scale, and there's no transition from this large project to the rest of the neighborhood to the east.
And maybe for me, it's just a matter of, sort of the initial reaction to that. It needs to kind of soak in. It seems like a pretty abrupt change. And does the step back really help in that regard? I'm not sure that it would make all that much of a difference, really, in terms of how this building's gonna relate to what's next to it. I guess another thought that I have, I wonder, the process that this project would go through for approval, their steps would be to apply for project plan approval, which would go to the Planning Commission and the City Council.
Project plan just comes to you.
Okay,
They've applied for that,
okay, so that's in the works.
yes.
When might that be ready for presentation to the Planning Commission? Is this part of it, I
I think
assume?
they're hoping that that would be heard from you sometime in August, maybe your first or second meeting in August.
Man, I wonder if seeing these two things in conjunction at the same time, same meeting, same kind of discussion might help.
Does this go before Design Review Committee?
The ordinance amendment doesn't, but the project plan will.
And
So-
also historic landmarks?
It's not in the historic district. The historic district ends at 100 East, so it's
Across the
just
street.
outside of it. And it's not a historic contributing structure there, as we've seen what was there, so.
Ms. Wyndon?
Mr. Wright, in the Joaquin neighborhood plan, is this encompassed in the Joaquin neighborhood?
This would be in the downtown neighborhood plan.
Okay.
And so, I guess to kind of help clarify, so the property is right here that would be developed. And then there's still some property before you get out of the DT1 zone. So the property that's on the edge of the DT1 zone would have to meet some transitional standards that we already have in our code since it's adjacent to a different zone. But since this one's in the DT1 zone, that transition doesn't have to take place till you get to the edge of the DT1 zone.
That's the house there that Mr. Anderson's talking about, right?
Yeah, the funeral home,
Funeral.
mortuary, yeah.
Okay, come up to the microphone. Your lot goes to, includes this house or? just
Yes, yes, that house, and,
This house?
and then down to the corner. And then you can kind of see where it, here, I think I've got a, so it comes from about right here and it follows that pavement. Right down there. It's that little rectangle. The scale of our rendering probably makes it seem bigger than it actually is. The lot is actually not that large, but there you go.
There's a lot more house now.
So that, sorry, the house north of the house that you're developing on, is just gonna be sandwiched in there?
We've tried to purchase their property several times, and I've talked to them many, many times. I don't know if you know Ron or not, but they just don't. And I've sat down, I've shown them the renderings, I've shown them what the
Yeah.
entitlements say that we can do, and he just, no, he says we're content to just be here and
Okay. Yeah, that'll be an interesting juxtaposition. Maybe our concern isn't so much with the ordinance that we're looking at tonight, but with the scale of the building, is that right?
That's my feeling, exactly. So, I mean, to that point, and maybe to help just me get over the, the thoughts I have about the step back, in terms of what is permitted by right on the site today, and I mean, for example, if they propose something we wanted to talk about, maybe a setback of some type at part of the property line on one of the right-of-ways, is that something that is within the purview of the commission to require? Or is it entirely at the discretion of an applicant to propose something and then the city's obligated to approve it, building height, different things like that? What kind of latitude would we have to critique those things and require changes to be made?
So currently you're kind of talking without these ordinance amendments.
Yeah,
So, yeah, they would be able to essentially build whatever's permitted in the DT1 zone currently, so the 100-foot building height, which
Okay.
is currently in there. So the only difference would be that they would have that step back, which would, change their design and their unit count and things, which, they're expressing as a need to be able to make the project work as a infill redevelopment project. So.
So as
By
a,
the zone to build to the sidewalk, so because it's a 0 minimum and 10 maximum, I don't think the planning commission could require 5 feet or 8 feet or something like that. If they want to build to the minimum, I think they'd be allowed to,
And height, 100 feet,
100 feet.
same thing by right.
and as the design evolves, I mean, today we're seeing a building that appears to step back a little bit. There's some articulation between the third and fourth floors. If we should approve this ordinance amendment, and the design evolves after that amendment goes through, then there's no obligation to even articulate that separation vertically, is there? Or horizontally, rather? I just want to be clear because you said this is not an historic area. In terms of massing unit, that articulation makes a big difference in terms of the
And I
building
agree
appearance.
with you, actually. So, one of the challenges, obviously, with the 20-foot step back is that 20 feet is, and I kind of went through this just briefly, but it's so big, it literally takes out units to the point where it's not economical for us. And I may get into this on this, I guess, second half of the next text amendment, but in urban infill redevelopment, it's significantly more expensive than developing an apartment site in suburban Provo somewhere, right? Because number one, the land is more expensive, but our ratio of parking structure to sticks and bricks, if that makes sense, like all of the concrete that it requires to put in our parking structure, the ratio between that and our sticks and bricks is proportionally so much higher. It makes our costs they just go up a lot. And so it makes urban infill developments really, really expensive, which means, well, you got to have the rents and the units and everything else to offset. You got to have the income to offset your cost. And you combine that with, the added articulation of trying to make it historic and the materials that you're using, the brick and everything else, it just becomes very, very inexpensive. That's why I say I recommend it for all of Provo, because if you're dealing with something that's even smaller than what we have, literally every square foot that you take out is square foot that I'm not renting. Like, would you mind just going to our floor plan again, if that's okay? And I'll show you here, but the way that our building steps, the whole building, sorry, and actually that would be helpful too, but if you went to the whole building, keep going up, I think it's the floor plan of the floor plan of the whole building we showed earlier.
One of the different colors, floor plan with different colors.
There you go, that's the one. So 20 feet again, cuts out all of that, and then you're like, well, what do you do with all that space? I can't lease it, and it's more balcony than anyone needs, and it's just extremely inefficient. Now, the way that our building works right now is, in order to articulate that break, which I want to do, I don't want a flat mall, we want it to look good and have good curb appeal. The corner, on this corner here, now would you mind going back to the elevation, the very first page? Well, it's actually different. Go back to to my PDF, the first page of my PDF. There you go. There we go. So if you look at this can be articulated stronger with the cornice if you want something.
Okay, you got to talk to the microphone because people are listening to this online.
Oh, okay. So if you want that to be articulated stronger, we certainly can have like a cornice that flutes out or something, but that steps back a foot, and then we step our windows back a foot. So we're trying to create shadow on the building so it doesn't look like a blank wall. And then as you transition from around that stucco corner, this steps back 2 feet, which gives us a fairly distinct break and also even some internal balcony space. But what happens is any more than that, you take out a foot across my unit, another foot or another foot or another foot, it's 1 foot by 130, and you multiply that by our rent and so on and so forth, and it makes I know it sounds ridiculous, but honestly, every square foot here matters. So if you wanted to say that that it has to be substantially similar, or we step back 2 feet and a foot on the corners or something like that in order to make that articulation, I would be totally fine with that, because I agree with you, we don't want to have a blank wall. I don't know if that overly complicates the ordinance or not, but.
Ms. Jensen, in your experience, how significant is that to have the 1 or 2 foot step back, but then a significant change in materials in terms of accomplishing some articulation?
Well, I think my question in response to that also takes a look at the balconies that are hanging over that edge. Are those just Juliet balconies? Are they just like a couple feet deep? So you don't really step out on them or use them?
It's enough. We've got sliding front. We've got, on those, we've got 3 panel doors on that side, and I think probably 2 panel. Those may be 3 also. So it's enough to slide it open, so you're getting great circulation right there.
I'm just wondering if we require something like a 5-foot setback, which clearly articulates a building change, or step back, not setback. That also then provides space for a real balcony that doesn't overhang the public right-of-way if we're building to the 0 lot line in the downtown district. So you accomplish the goal of articulating that historic character, but then also providing additional amenity for the tenants, and still hopefully within the realm of feasibility financially for the projects.
Would you be willing to do 3 feet? 3 feet is enough, a wide enough balcony to be able to get a barbecue out on part of it is we kind of really don't want barbecues and other things hanging out on the balconies on Center Street. But if that's what you're going after, like I said, 5 feet would still be too, in my opinion, it's too much. But if you can go with something like 3, and then on the corners, do something like a foot, so we're not giving up so much square footage wrapping around that entire corner. Does that make sense? And I don't know, I'm just trying to come up with some type of compromise there.
I was gonna suggest something similar. If we change the step back to 1 or 2 feet, then our developer isn't actually losing any square footage, but it would set a precedent for future buildings where, it would not be a 6-foot wall. There would be some kind of materials change, hopefully.
In answer to your earlier question, the only thing in the code that talks about that articulation is that cornice line that you saw in the language you have in front of you. The design guidelines would allow somebody to do 6 stories straight up if there's no step back. So again, perhaps revisiting the entire design guideline is something that the planning commission should look at a future date.
Could I make another comment to address that as well? So the existing code does have an architectural expression line, such as a cornice or similar feature, shall be used at the 3rd-story roof line. So if you want to keep that sentence in there and then get rid of the step back, if that helps, if that architectural feature is something that helps delineate where that historic line would be, if that's helpful.
But that would not require a different type of material above that, would it?
So the design standards already require like heavier type materials like stone and brick are configured at the lower levels and things like that to help accomplish these architectural design elements that are sought after. So those types of things are in there, but just that architectural expression line of a cornice going along that 3rd story is not in the design standards. It's only in that facade step back. So if that's desired, I think that's something we could keep in there and either add it to our downtown development design standards or change the title of this facade step back to architectural expression line or something to that nature, whichever's better.
Mr. Anderson?
for whatever it's worth, I think I finally have an opinion. And it's that I think really the things that would have an impact on neighboring properties and, the public right-of-way and just kind of that public space in terms of how it looks and how it feels, those are set with the zone, and I really don't think the step back is going to make a big difference either way relative to that. I think it could make some difference, but I don't think that's, for me, the biggest issue. And again, where the zone allows something, I don't think it's probably worth spending a lot of time talking about that at this point. But relative to, some kind of change in materials or something that differentiates different floors on the building and that sort of a thing, maybe something that would break up the bulk and the mass. I'm not a designer, but even to that, I'm thinking about some of my favorite buildings in the world that very uniform planes, very uniform materials, but timeless designs that are gorgeous, that have aged well and that sort of a thing. So I think I'm comfortable with either a reduced step back or no step back, and I think it's all or nothing, maybe to Mr. Jones' point that he started out with. I don't think it makes sense to take it, for this part of the Center Street corridor and not the rest. And that's it from me.
I would just agree that, excuse me, at this juncture, I think I would consider just this one block that we're initially asking for and not for the whole downtown zone until we look at some of the other design issues that we need to review.
I would agree. I'm more inclined to just recommend approval just for the one block here, and then look at the different design standards that Mr. Pepperoni has talked about. As far as, I have mixed feelings. I'm like 50-50. As far as recommending a step back for this project, if I were renting, I would prefer to have more of a balcony. And different buildings that I have seen going up around the city just in the last year, those that have balconies, I see people using them. And so if I was a renter, I would appreciate having a balcony more than just being able just to open the doors and have a breeze. That's a personal preference. I don't speak for everybody. But I think just going by what I see driving around, I see people using the balconies. So I don't know if it's fair to require a step back just so future renters can have a balcony, but I think that that would definitely be something that would be very attractive to a renter. So I'm split.
This actually doesn't meet our requirement in terms of a balcony. You can't do a Juilliard like that. You have to have 50 square feet of a balcony. So all this means is that he's going to have to extend them, but they'll extend over into the public right-of-way, which you've seen other projects that have done that.
So if we required a 2-foot step back, would that give enough room? Would that meet the requirement for a balcony?
They're allowed to project their balcony 5 feet into the public right-of-way, so even if they build to the lot line, they can still have a 5-foot balcony that goes beyond that. So depending on what the width of them are to get the 50 square feet, I think that would be...
You have a 50 square foot minimum.
And I would say that I think the renters would prefer square footage inside instead of outside, right? And we certainly don't want, what's the word? Potential pet hazards if someone left their pet on the balcony, right?
Or child.
Well, yeah.
Mr. Jones.
Well, if all of us had the same opinion, we would only need one person on the commission. So,
I mean, we can, if a 2-foot step back you think would help, that way if we set back 2, then we're picking up another, I mean, again, sorry, I need to be up here, don't I? I think that the corner, in the same way that the Knight building on the corner is proud, it has sort of that proud corner. I think that it's really important just from a architectural and presence standpoint to have a proud corner. That's kind of why we've designed it that way. But as we go further down, and that only steps back like a foot in through there, but as we go further down Center Street, I don't mind having some type of, if it's a 2-foot step back or something like that, and then our balconies, if we need to have them, they would maybe come out, probably another 3 feet after that, so you probably have about 5 feet in depth. I'm okay with something like that. We're just trying to get as much livable. If we were to go back to our floor plans, and the next text amendment is on the unit square footages, all of our floor plans are really, really tight. They're functional and they're great, but they're pretty tight. So everything that we lose there, we're just trying to save every square foot that we can get in those. So.
Thank you. Ms. Ellsworth?
I was just going to say, I don't think we want to micromanage the design or even the facade, but our main concern is probably the character of the building, is that right? But we need to move forward on the step back. So we know it's not 20, right? Is it 1 or is it 0 or is it 3?
Well, from what Mr. Pepperoni was saying, or Mr. Wright, the balconies can extend out over the public right-of-way. So there really wouldn't, in this project, there wouldn't need to be a step back, correct?
Not if you're trying to accomplish a balcony, no.
Okay. Could he sign a developer agreement to be able to maintain this look, or do we not do that? Would that not be the case?
It's unusual to have a development agreement with the planning commission on zoned property, entitled property. He's allowed to do what the zone permits. We've had other situations where developers have stood here and said, I'm willing to do these things, and doesn't this look great? And then they come back later and have changed that. I'm not saying the McKay will do that, but we have had that occur.
Okay.
Mr. Jones?
my opinion, I'd like to offer my opinion on balconies. I lived a year in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and the high-rise, high-class condominiums and apartment buildings had to have a balcony. That was just a requirement. It was an unwritten requirement. In the year that I lived there, I never, and I use the word advisedly, never saw anyone on the balcony sitting and having dinner or anything like that, because it was, number one, too hot, and number two, the bugs would eat you alive. And I thought, this is really silly to have a balcony, to pay that expense and not be able to use it. But that's what distinguished a high-class condominium from a low-class. Now, the low-class condominiums and apartment buildings that had balconies, the balconies were used for storage, or, you know, they'd put up or drying clothes or whatever. So I just thought, this is ridiculous, having balconies in Puerto Rico. So when I came back to Provo, I was aware of, that was kind of a little pet peeve, I guess I had. So I began watching the buildings here in Provo, and I've never seen anyone out on a balcony. I haven't. I see chairs and a table, but I never see anyone out there occupying the balcony, because it's not air-conditioned space. It's not heated in the winter. It's not cooled in the summer. So I don't know. I think I wouldn't put a lot of value in a balcony. And as it relates to this question, I think we should make our decision based on not necessarily having to accommodate a balcony.
I would just say, in a similar vein, we don't exactly know the buyer or the client as well as our developer, right? And so I would just as soon let them figure that out, what their client needs and wants, and I'm sure that will be in their best interest. If we did want to help the developer stick to this design, we could make a motion tonight on a 1-foot step back for that block, right?
That's correct. Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we amend the ordinance to include a 1-foot step back for that block from first east to second east.
Okay, so that's item 2. You want to forward a positive recommendation to municipal council for a 1-foot step back. That would be a change in the language originally proposed to attachment 1, changing the language highlighted in red, that there shall be a 1-foot step back in the building facade elevation between 100 East and 200 East. Is that correct? And do I have a second for that motion?
I'll second.
Ms. Wendon?
Discussion or question? Question. Would we still retain the requirement of having an architectural articulation at the, between the 3rd and the 4th floor? Would that still remain?
Yeah.
Okay,
The language on the cornice line would remain.
Right.
okay.
All those in favor of the motion? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Mr. Anderson opposes.
Yes.
Okay, so
May
we,
I mention why?
Yes.
It's just the scope. I have
Please.
no concerns with 1 foot versus 5, 10, 20, or whatever it might be, but like I said, all or nothing, I think's where I'm at on it, so.
we appreciate that. All right, the commission will forward a positive recommendation to the municipal council on item number 2 with the language that was added for the 1-foot step back. Okay, and our last item, item 3. McCray Christensen requests an ordinance amendment in section 14.21A.090 to reduce the average apartment square footage from 800 feet to 600 feet in the general downtown DT1 zone, and this affects the downtown neighborhood. And Dustin Wright again will present this.
Thank you. So this item is referring to the square footage. So you probably recall earlier this year a similar amendment regarding square footage, the average square footage in the downtown 1, downtown 2, and ITOD zones. The applicant for the project we've been discussing is making this request to keep the to only change the average, which currently is 800 down to 600 feet, but to maintain the 500 square foot individual unit size. And so when the downtown zones were created, they had an 800 square foot minimum average unit size, but they didn't have a minimum unit size. And then later on, that requirement in the downtown zones was removed from the ordinance. And then earlier this year, that was brought back to reestablish a minimum unit size. And specifically, that was to with the ITOD zone, the interim transit-oriented development zone, but we also applied it to the DT1 and DT2 zones so that we could get some more information and come back later with another more applicable average unit size for our downtown, because it's different with its character to our ITOD zones. And so with Similar to the last item, staff has the recommendation that this ordinance amendment not only apply to properties, as the applicant has requested, that front Center Street and that have commercial space on the ground floor, but that it applies to all developments in the DT1 and DT2 zones. And so it'd be the same thing as far as square footage goes for a new average of 600 square feet as opposed to the current 800 square feet. It would just apply to both DT1 and DT2 zones. And so if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Any questions from the commissioners?
Can I just make another comment before you jump in, Maria? So you may remember that when this was last discussed by the Planning Commission and City Council, the Planning Commission recommendation was a 400 square foot minimum and a 600 square foot average for both the ITOD and both the downtown zones. So this would essentially just increase the minimum over what the Planning Commission recommended. There's a couple reasons for the staff's rationale on this. Number one, we didn't include any discussion of the ITOD zone in this debate because it's in that area that we're most focused on trying to not get a greater concentration of low-income housing. And so the square footage minimums that were approved by the City Council would safeguard that from happening down in that area where they've been concentrated. The other thing is it would seem to me, as the Planning Commission discussed this, that the Planning Commission was focused on trying to avoid the scenario of an entire building of single-room occupancy units, where the entire building would be 200 to 300 square foot efficiency units. But it appears to me that, I don't want to speak for the council, so it appeared to me as the council debated this, the council was more focused on trying to encourage more 2 and 3 bedroom units in downtown. So your perspective and where you were coming from was quite different from where the City Council was looking at it from their perspective. That's just my observation of the debates y'all had. So I think this amendment that's being proposed still accomplishes that avoidance of single-room occupancy buildings. I don't think any of this addresses the encouraging more 2 or 3 bedroom units. And as the council has discussed this further, staff has pointed that out to them, that even what they approved with the larger unit sizes won't necessarily get you more 2 or 3 bedroom units, because that's not the way the code's written. So the council, I think, is going to continue to debate this also. Anyway, that's some of the staff rationale for why we're okay with this and why we thought we should just go ahead and allow it in downtown 1 and downtown 2, and again, not just restricted to this property.
Thank you. Commissioners? Ms. Wyndham?
Just a question. Where are the downtown 1 and downtown 2 zones? Where are they on the map?
We had that map up a minute ago. Here we go. So obviously the darker color is the downtown core, downtown 2 zone. Lighter color is the downtown 1. And the purple at the bottom is the ITOD zone. And that concentration of more affordable units tends to be more down in this area. In Franklin and South Franklin neighborhoods, that's where that concentration of affordable housing tends to be.
Ms. Ellsworth?
Mr. Pepperoni, are you saying that it doesn't matter if we change the minimum size, the council's not going to like it?
No, I'm saying that, again, as this has continued to be discussed by the City Council, Mr. Harding on the council and I have asked the council to try to articulate exactly what it is they're trying to accomplish, because when we clearly understand that, we can tailor the ordinance much better. and they're still having that discussion. No, I'm not saying at all that I think that they'll reject this. I think it's just going to cause them to have that discussion sooner rather than later.
Okay.
Are there any provisions in the code that require a certain composition, percentage of units? Is that anything that might be worth discussing relative to?
I think that's what the council's going to go with it.
Got it. So would there be any value in us talking about how that might look and making a recommendation to them, just asking your opinion, knowing what you do about the discussion? And
That's a hard question for me to answer for this reason. And I'd like your opinion also based on your experience. It appears to me, from all the market data I've been gathering, that the market really is for a large preponderance of one-bedroom units. The developers will build a couple 2 or a couple 3 bedrooms, but it's a very large preponderance for the one-bedroom. That's where the market is. I've watched cities over my career enact legislation to try to get the market to do things the market doesn't want to do, and it just never seems to work. And so if the council comes back and says, well, we want a certain percentage of 2-bedroom and 3 bedrooms, if those percentages aren't still pretty small, I'm afraid we're still not going to get what we want, because you just can't force the market to do right. And if your experience is different, please help me.
I would agree with that.
promoting
evaluation.
the idea of having something other than studios or one bedrooms, is that to try to attract a specific distinct demographic, young married couples with young kids versus singles or something like that?
Again, I think the
or-
council's not, I think that there are different opinions on the council. I've heard council members say they'd like to see more families living downtown, and I think that's what the market's telling us, is we just don't see families with kids moving into that environment. I'll give you an example. When my wife and I had our first kid, we moved into a single-family detached house. We lived in a condo prior to that. But when you start having the kids, then all of a sudden having a yard becomes really a lot bigger priority. And that's when we moved out of the condo. Is everyone like that? No. But are most people like that in our environment? I think yes. But again, that's just my opinion. I don't have data to back that up, other than the market data the developers are giving us.
Mr. Jones?
The developments that we've seen recently that have met the present minimum standards, what's been the result? Have they turned into slum dwellings?
No, not at all.
Have they
But
gone empty?
there's such a large housing demand, I don't think that any of them are having trouble renting. But I think it was just seeing Provo gravitating really quickly towards the smaller units, and then we got a proposal for an entire building of very small units that we haven't seen take place in Orem, and we haven't seen take place in Sandy, and we haven't seen take place in Draper, but suddenly we were getting in Provo. That's what set off alarm bells. By not having any minimum and seeing us gravitate towards very small studio and efficiency units, that's what caused staff to say, wait a minute now, is this going in the direction we really thought we were going to go when we took out the minimum altogether? My opinion would be no. We were getting a result we didn't expect. And that's why staff brought it back up to it as an issue.
But the results have been positive, right?
I think people would say the results have been acceptable, except when we start getting entire buildings of 300 square feet or less, then all of a sudden I think
Sure.
people are saying, no, that's not what we meant when we took out the minimum. That's not what we thought we were going to get, and that's not what we meant to open the door to.
And I'd maybe add to that, I think with decisions like this, the real fruits of that, they're not going to become evident for decades in all likelihood. I mean, contemporary new developments, buildings and different things like that, they're going to, rent's going to be strong, different things like that. So I think initially I'd expect the response from a market perspective to be pretty warm, regardless of size.
I'd be in favor of this amendment. And I know I'm not sure where the council's going to go with it, but I think I have heard some sentiments that they do want more families in that area, but I don't think the market can regulate families. And I know that one reason they want more families is because they'd like less transient occupants, but I don't think the market can regulate that, or I don't think we can regulate that, or the city can regulate that either.
How many of us would want to have 2 or 3 kids in a downtown apartment? Not me. I'd rather buy an older, if I couldn't afford a nice home, I'd rather have a smaller home in a less expensive neighborhood than live in an apartment with a couple of kids. I don't think that's an unusual opinion.
And for me, several hundred units in a building that's studios and 1-bedrooms, that creates vast neighborhoods eventually that are very homogeneous. And I'm not sure that there's a way to legislate around that, in my opinion. I mean, for me, a 2-bedroom apartment quickly becomes roommates. You know, it's not, you're not necessarily gonna put a square peg in a round hole. But again, I think we're talking about just developing neighborhoods in a very homogeneous fashion with the introduction of a lot of housing in downtown that's like this. And I'm not sure that's a bad thing, but.
Any other comments before we turn it over to the applicant? No? Okay, Mr. Christensen, if you'd like to come forward and state your case.
Yes. Would you mind pulling up? So I probably have way more information that you guys want to go through, and I know that you were that you guys approved the 4 and the 6, and so maybe this is something that you would support also. I hope that it is, but I'll just go through this just so I feel like I've said everything that I need to say. I hope that's okay, but I'll try to go through it quickly. So in the Provo City Vision, some of the things that it talks about, it's encouraging development of various types of housing, right? And in there it says Provo City will encourage the development of market rate housing. Red Sky is market rate housing. Provo City will, and I've underlined kind of the relevant sections, will encourage infill developments and redevelopment of multifamily and denser housing stock options in surrounding areas. Retail trade areas to help increase demographic figures and to provide larger consumer base to current and future retailers. Red Sky is an urban infill development, and it's going to bring approximately 10,000 square feet of new commercial retail and at least 130 new consumers. We have 130 tenants. So we think that it's going to energize downtown. The next one, the city will work with major employers and so on and so forth, understand growth projections and find suitable housing options for young married students and postgraduate professionals. This was really clearly an objective of the Provo City Vision, which that's exactly what Red Sky is doing. We're targeting young single professionals and marrieds. And so we feel like we're accomplishing that. Dave, would you mind going to the next slide? So this is what I took, and I agree with what Bill said. This is what I took from, I've met with many of the city council members over the last couple months several times, and this is what I took away in terms of their concerns. I think what Bill said was true. Maybe I wasn't here for the planning commission, but it sounds like you guys were trying to mitigate micro units, you know, by setting a 400 square foot minimum, which I think does that. And then the council came from sort of the opposite side, and we're trying to push families into downtown. I think that that's one of the objectives. And as we get into the demographic, what Provo's demographic is I just don't ever see that happening. That's not what the demographic of downtown Provo is or is going to be. So their concerns along with that were mitigating low-income housing. A 500 square foot minimum and a 600 square foot average doesn't promote low-income housing. We are willing to, you know, whatever the state or federal minimum requirements are, we're willing to agree with whatever those are to minimize low-income housing. Micro units tend to be about 250 square feet up to about 350 square feet or so. We are not micro units. Transient renters, all renters are in some level transient. It's a phase of life that they're in, and actually as we get into the demographic, that actually among millennials, which are ages 18 to 34, is growing. The amount of time that they rent is really, really expanding. So we're also proposing about 10,000 square feet of commercial. So if we were to actually add that into our total, we've got about 87,000 square feet of rentable square footage. If we were to add another 10, meaning convert the commercial to residential, we'd actually be close to about 760 square feet on average, if that makes sense. So we're giving up some of our average to bring in retail, which I think is a great amenity to downtown, a great amenity for the building. And then, of course, you guys mentioned that you agreed to that before. So, Dave, next slide, please. Thank you. Again, I'm not going to go into this, but we've already talked about encouraging infill development. Well, in order to do that, it's extremely expensive. We've already talked about that before. The next part, this is important to millennials in particular. And millennials very much are our demographic, age 18 to 34. That's the demographic of people who are renting and who anticipate will rent. 600 square foot average at about $1.60 a square foot, or $960 in rent. If we took an 800 square foot average, that bumps at $1.45, which is about market rate, up to $11.60. The difference is about $200 a month, or $2,400 a year. That's a lot. That's a lot for a millennial, for someone, and frankly, they want to spend that $2,400 on going to Thailand or Malaysia or Cancun or something like that that's just consistent with their lifestyle. They don't want to be spending it on rent. We don't need to get into the developer-friendly stuff. Basically, all I was saying is right now, it really is a blight. The development is pretty much a blight right now, and so having these type of friendly public policies will help redevelopment. Next slide, please, David. Okay, so I know this is a lot, but I'm just going to go through this quick. There's 80 million millennials. They represent about 25% of the population. They're delaying marriages. 44% believe that marriage is obsolete. That's a little different here in Utah County. But they're not in a hurry to get married or start a family, and that is happening here. 34% of women have bachelor's degrees, and most millennials are saddled with a lot of student loans. So they have debt. They're coming out of college with debt. Millennials, this is why they prefer apartments, and this is based on our research and studies. They prefer apartments to homes because, number one, purchasing a home means more debt. Renting is more affordable than owning because you don't have maintenance, repairs, property taxes, down payments, etc. The amenities, they want smaller spaces, more amenities, meaning I'll take less space if I get the retail on the ground floor, if I get a rooftop deck, if I get a clubhouse that has a yoga studio in it, that sort of thing. They want to be geographically flexible. What we mean by that is that they can't afford a home in downtown Salt Lake, but they can rent one there. And they're renting for the lifestyle. And they want to spend that money not on a home, not to be saddled with debt, but to be able to have the freedom to do all of the other leisure activities that they want to do. It's in some ways a little bit backwards. They want to capture a moment, sometimes I think, on Instagram, and sort of live their life backwards based on the moments that they want to capture. And that's an important thing for them, traveling and stuff like that. They want the freedom to move. Coming out of college, they are entering their careers, and they need to be able to have the economic flexibility to be able to go from one place to the next. I thought that this was interesting. Nearly 75% of 30-year-olds had kids in 1975, and more than 50% owned a home. But today, less than 30% of 30-year-olds have kids or own a home. And so the world is big, possibilities are endless, there's no haste to be burdened with property taxes, broken appliances, and the move towards home ownership is also motivated by, I don't know why it says BUY, sorry, a desire to minimize environmental footprint and avoid being bogged down to an abundance of such. So basically, they view ownership, they can rent everything. They can rent a wedding dress, they can rent just about anything in life, and they prefer to rent than own. This is, I think, an important, again, this is taken from an article that I read. Millennials are looking for affordable apartments with functional layouts, while older generations typically look for larger apartments. Millennials are comfortable with efficiently designed studios and one-bedrooms. In fact, according to Forbes, studios and one-bedroom apartments now comprise 54% of the apartment rental market due to millennial demand. Price per square foot for the apartment isn't as important to millennials as the total cost of the apartment. So they're saying, look, I can afford X, I don't care if it's tiny. That's basically what they're saying. They're willing to live with less square footage if the rent meets their budget. Millennials are less likely to own a car. Utah, again, that's a little bit different. This trend has less to do with being green and more to do with choosing exactly where they spend their money. Millennials prefer to spend money on experiences, and they place an emphasis on their personal lives over their work lives. And there's this whole talk in the corporate world about live-work balance, right? And that's important to them. Would you mind going to the next slide, Dave? So we paid multi-states or Western States multifamily, Jeff Neese, to perform market studies before we ever even get into designing our buildings. He's one of the foremost professionals in our industry. And if you look at this data, this is really telling. According to the census data, 49% of renters in Utah County live in structures with 3 or more units, but 65%, if we're talking about families now, 65% so live in a 1-unit, a 2-unit, a duplex, or a townhome, a 3 or 4 unit. And those are our families. When our families want to or need to rent somewhere, there's a massive demand for single-family homes, duplexes, and/or townhomes. So their needs are being met. They're just not being met downtown. That's not what they're looking for, like you mentioned, Bill. They're looking to live in the suburbs somewhere where they have a yard and they can send their kids to the schools that they want to send them to. Next slide, please. Again, this is very telling. Renters in the area tend to be young. In Utah County, 57% of renter households are headed by a person under 35 years of age. So 57% of the renters in Utah County are millennials, well, it says from 15 to 34, but from 18 to 34. And that makes up about 28,000 people. So there's a deep demand. And next slide, Dave. These are, and then 45% of the demographic of the renters in Utah County are 1 or 2 person households. Those are single working professionals and married couples, and they make up 45% of the renter demographic. So when we talk about unit mix, we're talking specifically about studios and 1-bedroom units because they make up such a large portion of the demographic. And again, families are getting their needs met elsewhere. So our unit plans, would you mind going to the next slide? So this is one of our unit plans. It's 755 square feet. These are the ones that look out onto Center Street. We come in, we have a flex room. If a family does have, it's intended to be an office because for the most part, 2-bedroom units are a family that wants a couple that is either looking to use an office or maybe have it as a nursery. They don't necessarily need a second bedroom. And so we're giving them an office or something that could be used as a nursery. And then you come in and you've got your 1-bedroom, which we anticipate will have those sliding retractable doors so it opens up onto the whole unit. And this is just a 3D version of what that would look like. Kitchens are important to millennials. They eat out, but they actually like to cook a lot too. And so all of them have a full functioning kitchen with a bar. Go ahead. This is our smallest unit. It's 507 square feet, but it's actually very, very functional. All of our units have a bike rack. The other one holds 2 bikes. The smaller one only holds 1. But again, we see this as, we don't have any studios, but this is our smallest 1-bedroom, and it's very functional. Do you mind the next slide? Again, a fully functioning bar, lots of windows to let in natural light, place to hang your bike. It's a small unit. But again, it's extremely functional, and it's got a ton of windows that will look out across the street at the temple and capture Y-mount on the backside and Utah Lake.
Sorry to interrupt, but how big was that one again?
That was 507 square feet, and that's good. You can go back. That's just a carryover from So at the end of the day, I know that again. I think it's really just. I think from the city council's perspective, they think of things, well, what would I want maybe, or what would I feel comfortable living in? or maybe from the perspective of trying to bring families downtown, when in actuality, the people who are coming. So you ask, why is Provo different than, say, Orem or Draper? And it's because Provo actually offers a lifestyle. Orem doesn't. It's one massive strip mall, and I wouldn't go build this in Orem somewhere unless it was, like what they're doing next to the mall, maybe. Draper's the same way. It doesn't have a downtown core. This is one of the only cities in Utah outside of Salt Lake that actually has an urban core where you walk out, you can get on the BRT, you can go to Front Runner, you can have dinner there, you can go to Velour and listen to a concert, you can go to a comedy club. It literally has an atmosphere. And then you also have 70,000 students, which are right there, and that creates its own young scene, and the people want to stay in the scene. And so, but that demographic, those millennials, what they're looking for is something like this, not an 850 square foot apartment that they can't afford. And so we are really, so I guess to end everything, I mean, I think that what we're proposing here is consistent with what the market demands. In fact, Jeff Neese, when I told him about this, our market analyst, he's like, what? That's completely running the opposite direction to where the market is going. It's not going bigger units, it's going smaller units. And so anyway, hopefully you take that into consideration and understand the demographic that we're going after here. So.
Thank you. I'll turn it back to the commissioners for discussion and a motion. Mr. Jones.
The square root of 600 is 24.5. The square root of 800 is 28. So if you had if the apartment were square, which it's not, but just to give you a perspective, a 600 square foot apartment would be 24.5 by 24.5. An 800 square foot apartment would be 28 feet by 28. So about 3 feet on each side of your apartment. You're scowling. Did I do did I do the math wrong?
That's just my face, I'm sorry.
It's just an interesting
Okay.
way to analyze the difference
We're
between the two.
we're talking about 3 feet, adding the difference between 3 feet on 2 walls.
Mr. Anderson?
State and federal requirements. On one of your slides, you mentioned something about state and federal requirements. What?
Oh, I think, and I don't know this exactly, but I think there are state and federal requirements for affordable housing, meaning you're required to provide some amount of affordable housing in any...
On a community-wide basis,
yeah,
right? Not,
yeah. Now, that may be, and that's why I'm saying we'll agree to whatever that minimum is. We'll say, look, you can cap it at 10%. If the state or federal government requires that 10% of your units be affordable housing units, then...
I'm not aware of a requirement like that comes into play.
Well, and if that's the case, then we don't need any. We're not intending that any of this be affordable housing.
Totally market rate.
Total
100%.
market rate. Yeah.
Not affordable.
Yeah, and the cost of the building, we couldn't do it based off our structured parking stuff alone. We couldn't afford to make it an affordable housing development. So.
Okay. If I have any concerns about it, and thank you, that's helpful. It's with how it's going to function in 10, 20, 30 years, something like that. And I appreciate the idea, and I don't know, but I'm very easily persuaded to think that how a building like this is amenitized, or what's there to attract people, probably has a lot to do with the different demographics that you might be able to sign contracts with relative to just requirements. Is there anything, I mean, I'm used to a more suburban setting where you get the playgrounds and the clubhouses and the different things like that with different projects, so.
You want me to tell you what we're proposing to do?
That'd be really helpful, and also just what do we require, kind of as the baseline for me.
Yeah, there are amenity requirements. I want to say it's 20% or something to that. So they are providing amenity space. It's required for all developments that have more than like 20 units or something like that.
10% of your gross square footage.
What kinds of things are those?
So like a clubhouse or a pool or a
Things like
gym,
that.
things like that.
Okay.
They're largely meeting it with the rooftop With their rooftop
balcony and
space
what's
for
up there.
larger meeting.
Yeah, we have, what we're proposing is we've got about over 5,000 square feet of rooftop deck, like those renderings that we showed. And so we'll have a couple jacuzzis up there. We've got a whole station for barbecues, and then we'll have fire pits with, basically the idea is you get up there on the 6th floor and you want to be able to see 360 around to all of the views that you
Great
have.
amenity, right? That's pretty awesome.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then on the 4th, so the way our structure works is you go up 3 floors with a parking structure, and we're actually wrapping it with our units. And then we put a concrete cap on the top of that, and then we go out over the top of that 4th level with our units. And on that 4th level, on that concrete cap, we have a clubhouse that's exterior to the rest of the building that has a you could kind of see it on that floor plan.
Now it's making sense.
Yeah, that rectangle thing out there in the middle. So that will be a combination, and we haven't completely modeled the inside of that yet, but that's going to be a combination of exercise/clubhouse for people during the winter to be able to go in, big screen televisions, watch a BYU game, hang out with their friends, that kind of stuff. And then have a portion of it also used as like a yoga studio or something. The thing that millennials really, really want is they want their apartment to be a smart apartment. They want to be able to monitor their thermostat on their phone. They want to have high-speed internet. They have to be connected 100% of the time. And so having Google Fiber is a big amenity because Wi-Fi speeds, and I guess it's not Wi-Fi, but the speed of your internet is really important. So,
Thank you. I'm more concerned about those components of a project than the average
Units.
unit size, although I think with 600 square feet, we were kind of winging it with the recommendation that we made a few months ago. I mean, there's not a great science behind that necessarily, though. I appreciate Mr. Jones. I think that is a good way to put it in perspective, really. So I'm comfortable with 600 square feet.
Did you have a comment?
I do. I hate hearing people analyze millennials, but that's what I am. And there's certainly a market for what's been described. I think that it's a smart project, and I would be in favor of the proposed change.
So do I have a motion from the commissioners? Ms. Wendy.
The motion that we forward with a positive approval, or I'm getting tongue-tied. That we forward with a positive recommendation to the City Council. Item number 3, McKay Christensen requests an ordinance amendment to Section 14.21A.090 to reduce the average apartment square footage from 800 feet to 600 feet in the general downtown 1 zone and also the DT2 zone, right? This amendment applies to all residential developments rather than only mixed-use developments with commercial fronting Center Street.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Mr. Anderson, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries unanimously. A positive recommendation to Municipal Council on item number 3. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr.
Second.
Done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, what's appropriate by way of maybe throwing some ideas out for things to talk about in the